is probably a commentary on individuality or lack of, but it's for another day. One thing about so the character designs and the character renderings, character models. So let's say that they're kind of from a bygone era in some ways. If you think of classic like Dead or Alive designs, right? They were kind of action figure-y, kind of dolls basically. Character models from a bygone era put into
It is weird. It feels a little out of place, I think.
I know you were talking about the character from a bygone era. I do think the character model was actually like very distracting in not a good way, because like with the camera angles chosen, it just felt like this game seems like a game that came out in like 2002 in terms of its like character design. It's like a bit old and not flattering, I don't think, for a modern audience. In comparison to something like Forspoken, which has, yes, it has a much more realistic looking character designs. It's not these hyper proportioned something or another's, but it also seemed, I don't know, a bit more grounded in a way that I found much more appealing. What we saw here.
From a general standpoint, I do agree with you, but I do think Project Eve, when it comes to facial construction, it does have some merit though, because the characters look very different. It's just that once you go neck down, there's a lot of issues on display.
That's the problem. Yeah, that's the problem.
Hello everyone, surprise, I have legs. I'm outside the Shmup studio today, so hopefully the lighting's looking okay. I might do this from time to time during the summer, and today's topic is definitely an interesting one. I sort of fear what the comment section will look like, but I do think it is an important topic, and just to give context to this video, it wasn't like I was sitting around and thinking, how do I come up with a hot button controversial issue to cover on the channel? What's gonna be a real spice fest? No, it's nothing like that. What it is that over the past year or so, in the course of doing my reviews and also just sort of seeing other people's reviews or articles or takes on various games, this subject has come up quite a bit. And every time I'm on the verge of bringing something related to it up in a video, I think, you're about to open Pandora's box. The second you say anything that might be involved with this topic, prepare yourself, because that's going to be the entire focus of the video. I could say anything after that point as far as the gameplay, level design, who gives a shit. Everyone's going to care about this topic specifically. So I thought, well, rather than trying to squeeze it into one of my reviews and trying to explain myself for an hour in the comments section, I thought, why don't I make a dedicated video to the topic so that in the future, when I bring related issues around this topic up in the context of the reviews, I can refer people back to this video to at least get my perspective on it. Because let's be honest, when it comes to mainstream game journalism or whatever you want to call it, game reviews, this is a real danger zone for mainstream game reviewers. It is a hot electric fence where if they touch it and they touch it wrong, they're done. They're cooked. The guillotine is coming and it's chopping their head off. Job over, probably career over. It's a dangerous territory to get into. So there's been some examples of this recently where, for example, Project Eve, Digital Foundry was giving their thoughts on the Project Eve trailer last year or earlier in the year. I'm losing track of time, but that's whenever that was. And one of the guys was saying how much of an issue it is and how it's over-sexualized and how that's outdated. It's outdated. We've progressed beyond breast. Breast and asses don't exist in our minds anymore. we're done with that. And then he sort of pointed out this other game that had better female character design in his mind. And the female character they show reminded me of like a create a character in Tony Hawk. If you go into Tony Hawk and just do create a character, she's like a mannequin almost, right? Not even just that she has small breasts or anything, but like just the form of her body was so mannequin-like. It was so generic, right? And so like, this is the future, according to Digital Foundry. The future of female character design is generic Tony Hawk create a character, basically. And he actually mentioned like DOA's outdated and they look like little dolls and that sucks and all that sort of stuff. Now, that guy's entitled to his opinion. He's a journalist. That's what he does. I don't necessarily have a huge issue. Well, I don't agree with his opinion, but you know, it's his job. He can say whatever he wants. But the part about it that kind of struck me is the rest of the panel. So he was on this panel. No one else said a word. And maybe they agreed, maybe they didn't agree. My problem isn't necessarily that this guy's expressing his opinion. My problem is that no one else can refute his opinion or can argue against his opinion, because that is a sand trap waiting to swallow you. So that is actually more of the focus of this video. I'm not here to moralize. I'm not your pastor, your priest, your liberal arts teacher, wherever people get their morals these days. I'm not here to tell you what to think about the topic itself and to say this is right, this is wrong. Shame on you, for shame, you dirty internet boys, for shame. I'm not trying to say that. What I'm trying to do is just sort of open up a lane of conversation that I think is totally closed down right now. And hopefully I can do that successfully, because I do think it'll lead to a much healthier dialogue about this. Because right now, here's another example. So that was the Digital Foundry one. It'll be interesting to see when Project Eve comes out, by the way, what they'll be saying. If they'll be like, you know, 8 out of 10 or whatever, and one of the minus points in their little summary is, you know, character too hot, too sexual, or too whatever their perspective is. Another example of this, though, and this one was more interesting because there was sort of a back and forth on the internet, at least, which was Tifa in Final Fantasy VII Remake. So if we all remember Tifa from the original Final Fantasy VII, she definitely had some polygons to work with, to put it lightly. And so bringing her into the remake, Square Enix, I swear they put out some sort of press statement about it, which is funny to think about. Listen, bros, we had to reduce her breast size because it looked a little silly in the remake. You know, we're going for a more realistic sort of vibe. We're not working in polygons anymore, so we gave her more of a suitable breast size, right? So we reduced them. And I remember the back and forth between people, and one side was saying, well, you can't reduce Tifa's breast size because that is part of her character. We need to preserve her character, and by doing so, you are changing her character. And as much as I am tempted to agree with this perspective, I appreciate the effort. I don't know if that's actually a good argument, because it doesn't follow suit for the rest of the game, basically. Because everything else, right, you're translating from the PS1 to a PS4 at the time. Everything else is going to need to be shifted over, and there is absolutely going to need to be lots of changes visually to lots of different characters, not just Tifa and her breast. I can get it. I mean, there is sort of a subtlety here, so that's why I'm saying I'm not trying to go full one direction or another. Like, if they completely removed her breast and she's just a totally different looking character, I think that has a lot of validity. But I think kind of moderate shift there, I think there was some justification. And the problem is that argument is only going to really work in the context of something like a remake, where let's say they make Final Fantasy 17, I don't remember what they're on now, Final Fantasy 17, Tifa's back, and in the lore they gave her a breast reduction because her back was hurting. So now she's back, she's got a breast reduction. What did the fans say then? It's a new game, and in lore they've justified it. So now you can't really say anything using that argument, right? So I don't think it's particularly a very strong argument. And then another issue is, let's say they make Final Fantasy 17 and all of the female characters have reduced breast size and reduced sexualization across the board. They really button them up, you know, get thee to a nunnery, non-sexualized as they possibly can. As that person who feels this is a little bit off, you're not really agreeing with this decision, what do you say? how do you argue for more sexualization without just sounding like a horny boy? And that's exactly how you're going to be depicted. And in that conversation about Tifa's breast size, that was like the main refrain of the people. Like if you were a game journalist, for example, and you were defending Tifa's breast size reduction in the remake, you're going to just, one of the arguments will be, oh, these are just a bunch of horny boys. And they just, want to see more pornographic style stuff. And so that's not in respect to the character. And, there's all sorts of arguments people can come up with. So that's not really going to work. And this is something I've been pondering for a long time now, because it's a feeling you want to express, but the words for it are not quite accessible. I haven't heard anyone say them. And so here is my attempt. This is kind of the part of the video, is I want to try and open this lane at least a little bit to where people aren't going to just outright dismiss you as you just want to get off and you don't care what it takes. I don't think that's a fair assessment of the situation, but I don't want to fall into the other side of it where it's just full libertine and you're saying, well, everything should be sexual. Let's get sexual. Let's make everything. I do think there is a conversation, a back and forth. There can be moderation. There can be taste. All of that stuff I think is important. But in the way the conversation works right now, here's a bit of an analogy. Hopefully it makes sense. Let's say, because we're retro gamers, the conversation is a CRT television. And on a CRT television, like those old school ones, you need to dial in the contrast, the red, the blue, the green, to get the color in the picture just right. Now, the way it works now, let's say there's the sexualization knob. The sexualization knob only turns one direction. You can only turn it down. And so that is why whenever you see even the slightest changes to characters and their sexualization and their depiction, like for example, Faye in Cowboy Bebop, they sort of tone down the sexualization of the character with the actress's wardrobe, and I think the actress's portrayal as well. And fans were not happy with this. And again, people can just say, well, the fans are just horny boys, so who cares what they think? The problem is, though, is that the reason why people are so hypersensitive to any sort of change, and I'm sort of becoming this way myself, is because once that knob is turned, it will not be turned back. It only goes one direction. So if they take Faye and they change her shirt, so now her midriff isn't showing, that's it. There's no going back. They're not going to be like, well, you know what, boys, we've been thinking about it. Maybe you have a point. So the midriff is back. That's not going to happen. It's just sort of a progression you're seeing across a lot of the characters and a lot of the games. And now when you're seeing new female characters being introduced, and a lot of them that are being introduced definitely don't have as much of a sexual edge, I guess you could call it, sexual flair, as the characters of the past, you can't help but think, is this an artistic choice, or is this just because this is the dominant view and now everyone has to fall in line? And it's a little bit eerie, in my opinion, when you see reviews, when you see interviews, because it is such like a we're all agreeing, we all think the same thing. Unilaterally, we all think the female form must be represented this way in our games. And you're just seeing it over and over again. I think that explains a perspective that doesn't get expressed a lot, which is that there is some value to sexual flair, and we're going to talk about that. But the sensitivity towards the removal of it right now isn't just because boys are horny. It's because we know that the knob does not turn back the other way. They don't try and dial it in, where with lots of other things, they'll try and sort of find the balance and have a conversation and dialogue and say, well, like blood, for example. Our current gaming culture is completely fine with excessive blood and hyper violence. There's no issues there. So if Doom comes out and you feel like there's not enough blood in Doom, you can go ahead as a reviewer and say, this needs more blood. And no one's going to be like, you violent sociopath, you dirty, this is your torture porn and you get off to it, you dirty boy. How could you ask for such a thing? What's wrong with you, right? That won't happen with stuff like violence or with many other aspects of game. But if you say, wait a minute, the outfits are a little they're a little dour, they're a little boring, right? You're opening up a whole can of worms there. So here's my perspective, my attempt to justify preserving sexual flair among female characters. And one more interesting sort of side conversation that comes up that I think people are trying to sort of work as a solution is, let's just sexualize everyone in the game, and there you go. That'll be sort of the answer, right? You'll see this. So let's say Dead or Alive. Dead or Alive is a great example. If Dead or Alive comes out, game journalists will criticize it for being overly sexual, demeaning to women, or whatever they think. And as a fan of DOA, what do you have in your tool belt? Well, some people say, wait a minute. Hold on there. DOA isn't unfair because there's also male characters in DOA, and the male characters in DOA are also hyper-sexualized. I don't really agree there, but let's say, for the sake of the argument, let's say you could argue that they're sexualized. Therefore, the female characters aren't being singled out, and it's all good. Again, I appreciate the attempt, but I don't think that is a very strong argument, and it's pretty easily slapped aside because, one, let's admit it, if DOA 7 comes out and it's male characters, there's like one female character, that's an issue, right? Part of DOA's appeal is that sexual flair, is the sexual edge. That cannot be denied. If you're pretending like it's not an aspect of the game, I don't know. I don't think that's an honest assessment. That is part of what makes DOA fun, is that sexual edge. I think at times DOA can take it too far, definitely. But when it's on course, when it's doing things right, that's part of the fun of the game. And so the male characters don't really add that. They're not really the stars of the show. They're just the supporting cast. So they could come or go. They could release Dead or Alive 7, no male characters, very few people would care. You know, it's all about the female cast. That's what the game's about. That's what we're looking for. So I appreciate the attempt, but in a lot of these cases, like Chun-Li and Mai and all these iconic female characters, Cammy, all these iconic sort of sexualized fighting game characters, that is part of their appeal in a way that Ken and Ryu, yeah, they're strapping lads and everything, but it's not quite the same. It's not what gets them over the edge, right? So I appreciate the attempt, but I also don't think that's a very convincing argument. I think the argument that I want to put forward is that having a sexual edge to a female character is a unique aspect of female characters that I think is misguided to deny. It's a complicated topic, of course, but I think how a character presents herself, or like the developers present for her, because she's not a real person, how that character is presented, though, sexually, does say something about them beyond just I'm hot and that sort of thing. For example, let's say you have a character and she's a bit of a rebel. You know, she's got a rebellious nature. It would be sort of odd, in my opinion, where you have this rebellious young character. She's young, she's rebellious, she's full of vitality, fierce, you know, all the things that apparently a lot of female characters, Bayonetta basically, that a lot of people like in a female character. Don't you think it would be sort of a weird fit to take a character like that and have her be like, yeah, I'm fierce, I'm hot, I'm proud, but I don't like my body and I'm going to deny its existence, basically. And you don't really see that in real life. Part of youth, part of vitality is expression of the body. And there is a value there, a connection there you can draw with the character that if you just cover it up all the time and deny it, I just don't think it's artistically compelling. You're losing out on an aspect of the character. It's also a way to make your characters iconic and memorable. Because think about a lot of the popular female characters, right? Bayonetta, all the fighting game characters and stuff. A lot of them have that sexual edge to them. And I think another problem with this conversation is that we're shutting down a very specific aspect of female character design, but we don't have a real clear, coherent reason to do so, because all the reasons I've heard about female characters being a problem, you know, they're sexualized and all that sort of stuff, it feels like to me none of these arguments are either consistent with themselves or people don't truly believe them. I don't believe that people believe them, I guess. For example, like with Project Eve, right? You're a journalist, you're looking at Project Eve, and you're looking at the character model, which I think looks fantastic, and you're like, it's outdated. And then you point to this other character model that looked significantly less engaging, and you're like, that's the one. And it seems like, is this a natural choice of yours? Is this what you really think, or is this what you're supposed to think? A little bit of a Clockwork Orange, it feels like at times, where a lot of the people are sort of like retrained out of their natural instincts. Like, oh, I gravitate towards this character naturally, but I'm not supposed to, right? And the problem that I have is I can't engage in this sort of cognitive dissonance, right? I can't look at an attractive character. That's an issue. I don't like it. And then look at a plain boring character and think, that's it. That's the ticket. You know, I can't go along with this sort of cognitive dissonance. So yeah, I guess people could say, oh, you're just being a horny boy or whatever it is. But I don't think that's the best way to critique art, right? And what your eye is attracted to, what your eye naturally longs for is important, I would say. As an artist, I would say that's very important. I've talked about this before in my other videos. Beauty matters, graphics matter. And it's so funny, we're completely fine saying all these other aspects of beauty are completely natural and good. You know, you want nice backgrounds, you want nice color contrast, you want nice landscapes, you want nice blood and gore effects. You want everything to be beautiful and amazing. Don't go overboard with the female characters, whatever you do, because that's pushing it too far. You have no right to do that as an artist. And I don't agree with that sort of thing. So, and along those lines, I'm not even sure I agree with this diagnosis in the first place. The diagnosis being that in order to entice new female gamers, or whatever the broader argument is, what we need to do is we need to tamp down the female character depictions in games, because that's uncomfortable. And if it's uncomfortable, that needs to be addressed. But conversely, I think you're actually making it more uncomfortable in a way. If you change the context around something, I think you actually end up amplifying the attention on it rather than diminishing it. By focusing all of your energy and attention on the female characters and how they look, and making it so critical and making it so important and making it like a big issue, you actually are turning it into a bigger issue and amplifying it. So here's an example of what I'm talking about, and this comes from a little bit of personal experience, but I grew up in a very religious area where modesty was very important. And I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but I will say one byproduct of that is, let's say you have a group of girls and there's a very strict dress standard for that group of girls, right? And so one day, you know, all the girls come to school, they're all very modestly dressed. That's very important. One day a girl shows up in like a short sleeve shirt, tank top or something, right? Now, in an environment that's not so heavily focused on, we need to make sure these girls are covered up, that outfit isn't that big of a deal, right? If she was out and about at the mall or she was at the park, people wouldn't think twice about it. But in the context of every inch of extra skin is dangerous, that tank top, that's a statement. Everyone's turning and everyone's looking like, holy shit, you know, get a look at her. This is a big deal. She is saying something here, because you've changed the context around the female body. And I actually think this is what we are doing with games. I don't think it's necessarily that healthy, either as critics or as creators. My philosophy on this is, let's not be creeps, but let's not make it such a big deal, you know? And that creates one last paradox, and then I'll get to the conclusion of the video. And that paradox is, the female form is the female form, and it is going to be enticing to a large swath of your demographic of male players, no matter what you do, no matter how much you try and nerf it. Again, back to the example of, if you try and dress her up in church clothes, well, some of your players are going to enjoy that sort of style. Really, the only answer is, and the answer I think we're starting to see, is they're just starting to chop away more and more at female characters, to the point where it's like, might as well just throw a male character in there at this point, you know? The distinction between the two characters is becoming less and less clear. And the irony is, oh, we need to create female characters so that more female gamers or whatever the goal is can identify with them. Are they going to identify with these characters? Or are they going to start identifying with other characters that maybe are a bit more sexual, like a Bayonetta, for example? She seems to be hella popular. Tifa, the Final Fantasy girls, they seem to be hella popular. And it's funny, whenever you look at what types of characters that I've seen a lot of female gamers drawn to, they're the very same characters that, you know, people are saying we need to nerf them, we need to get them out of here. So overall, what am I saying in this video? What I'm getting at is that I think there needs to be more of a lane for this conversation to take place in less of such a exaggerated, heated context where we immediately start going to moralizing and we immediately start going to like larger contextual issues in the world. I mean, if you're an activist or you're religious or whatever your ist is, maybe that's how you see the world and maybe you can't engage in this conversation without those aspects. But as artists, I don't think this perspective is great because I don't know where this occurred, but somewhere along the line, it was decided, maybe in college, that art needs to be moral. Art needs to be correct. Art needs to teach and be like parables or whatever it is. I've never felt that way about art. I've always felt like it's an expression. And some of the things you express are going to be maybe a little less realistic or a little less desirable to a large group of people, but you are exploring something that cannot be explored in your regular life. So you want a female character that looks a certain way. I think Bayonetta was like this. The guy dreamed of Bayonetta or something like that, right? With these ideas and characters, I think there needs to be a little bit more freedom and a little bit less judgment on what's going on here, because I just feel like the critics and the press and all these YouTubers, they have their foot on the neck of artists. And it feels like to me, in the millennial age, the might is not among the artists. The might is among the press and the critics. The critics have a much more power, it feels like, in today's landscape than the artists. And it's kind of sad, honestly, because a lot of art these days that's being produced is so easily informed, so easily swayed to the whims of the critics. The artists are so willing to please and so willing to do whatever it takes, right? It does feel like we are just dictating what is made, what isn't made. You know, DOA 5 comes out, the critics say it's too sexual, we don't like this, we don't care what the fans think, this is a problem, this is wrong. And then DOA 6 comes out, and Team Ninja's like, well, shit, we got owned by the critics, so let's tamper it down. Do the critics turn around and say, DOA 6, I'm proud. You know, they listened to what we said, and we're proud of them. No, critics don't give a shit. And their sales get absolutely owned because in the press, they're like, oh, we're tampering it down, we're listening to the critics. And did the critics really reflect what the fan base was looking for? And this happens over and over again. And I think it creates this sort of frustration among artists. Is this result of stale, safe, derivative art? Not just sexually. This is a little bit outside of just this context, but this is just a great example because the artists fall so in line with this. I would love to see a Western studio especially come out, make something bold, make something that gets people talking. And, you know, they get all these sort of negative press. Oh, they're so problematic, they're so bad. And the dev team just being like, we are bad. We're bad boys and we're doing bad stuff. There is not a lane for like edgy art anymore. What's edgy? What's pushing things? So that is my perspective on the issue. Hopefully it connected with some of you out there. Hopefully I didn't moralize or virtue signal. That was my goal in the video. Maybe I made that, maybe I didn't. And I do know that there is a lot of people out there who have this real solid belief, where it comes from, I won't argue, that art cannot be on its own terms. Art must be subservient to the political landscape. Art must be subservient to people's moralistic worldviews. It cannot live outside of that. It must conform. It cannot live outside of that. And to do so is problematic, right? Everyone's favorite phrase. And I'm getting very tired of this style of criticism because it just really does feel like it's more moralization than actual art critique. I think people don't know how to be art critics anymore. And I think that is a real shame. People can't put aside their own personal values and personal beliefs and try and meet the artist on their terms. And I do think it's a bit of a cottage industry in content because a lot of people lack, okay, now I'm just talking smack, but a lot of people lack originality. A lot of people lack critical artistic direction they want to go. So what they'll do is they'll sort of just witch hunt art that offends them and attack it. Where I'm coming from is I try to meet the artist a little bit more where they're coming from. And I may not fully agree with what they're up to and what they think, but if that was the case, how much art would be open to me? You know, how much of the world could I experience if I only attached to and paid attention to things that I 100% agreed with and fell in line with what I think? Hopefully this has been illuminating or frustrating, either or. If it's elicited some sort of response from you that you found stimulating at the least, please like, subscribe, tell all your friends. Adios, everyone.
So thank you to the $5 patrons, 100, Dingo, Another Joe, Anthony A, Anthony Iodice, Aaron Solis, Asa Davis, Bo, Ben, Borg-D22, Brian Shiver, Chris Yusufovich, Chris Perry, Climby Coyote, Cook Some Soup, Corey Mark, Des Ardio, Dark Wing, Darren Griffin, Delta Tango 6, Disco Stas Leia, DJ 420 Praise It, Eric H, FCK Full Set, Retro Schmupper, Hausu, Kiwi, JLab, JB RPG, Jim Knockham, John Kelly, Jolts, Gameboy Guru, K, K2, Kikoman 589, Corbin, Larich, Malaise, Mark Toms, Mataroso, Matthew Derrigis, Maz, Megadeth 859, Minung, Michelin, Michael Stum, Mitch L.Y., Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, and Electron, Neon Dagger Games, Oglekugels, Philip Mason, Rattlecat, Raul, Realskeen, Riff Mason, Rolf015, Scanline City, 7 Overdose, Shmup Junkie, Silas, Space Photos, Stadium Arts, Steve Fiction, The Boot Rex, The Real Ikuzo, The Dirty Screech, The N1, The Old Bensta, TRM, Zugumo, Twilight EX, Wabby Legs, X20 Spect, Plasmo, and Utakaya. Thanks for watching.